Alright, what is going on? What's happening? How's everybody doing today? My name is Chuck and welcome back to a brand new video. So today we're going to be hopping into ranking all the guns in Warzone from basically best to worst, you know, most meta to like they're absolute dog water, terrible, you should never use them. We're just going to be jumping into a tier maker and we're going to be going through everything and showing you guys basically what you should be using in Warzone and kind of things you should be staying away from. I thought this was going to be kind of an interesting video to do and just kind of have some fun with it. So if you guys are enjoying this video, do me a favor and smash like the next 5 seconds for some good luck and subscribe. We're on the road to 800,000 subscribers, so it'd be really awesome if you guys join the squad. With that being said, let's actually jump into this thing here because we had a lot of guns to go over. Okay, so we're here in the Warzone tier maker. So we have this is actually created by Pony Hoff, and so we have like the strongest meta that can compete slash off meta, viable, don't play, and then memes slash niche. Basically, we could try to adjust these categories. I'll tell you guys, like, basically you don't want to use any of these things down here, but we have a lot of different guns to go through here. So let's actually start with this here real quick. So basically I'm just gonna go kind of a little bit down the line here, and then we'll just kind of start going through a bunch of these, though I could probably tell you, some of the ones at the bottom here probably aren't going to be very, meta or usable. So first thing is first here, the AK-47 from Cold War. This one, what I would say is probably to go up in here to the strongest slash meta category. Just because it actually did get buffed, pretty significantly. I thought it was, I think it's a really solid weapon nowadays to use, though the recoil is still a little bit kind of crazy. It definitely hits really hard, and I would say it's definitely a meta usable gun. You can run that as a primary, a secondary, whatever. Next up is the AK-47 from Modern Warfare. I don't know. I would say this is just kind of like, don't play. I don't use it at all. I don't find it usable really kind of in any way, shape, or form. It's not quite meme slash niche, but it's just not really usable. Then we have, of course, the AMAX. That's, listen, top tier viable. It's probably one of the better ARs, probably one of the best ARs to use in Warzone right now. It's like a staple for me. Like if I'm going to try hard, and I want to get like, a gameplay with an SMG, probably my go-to is going to be like an AMAX. It's just like, it's one of the top tier ARs to use. The AN-94, this one's going to probably go into like maybe the viable category because you can use it, but it's not necessarily like really great. So, you can use it, but I don't really find it to be all that awesome, to be honest with you. Next up is going to be the AS Val. So the AS Val, I'm definitely going to throw this in the strongest meta category because this does, I believe, have the fastest time to kill out of any gun in Warzone. And the downside is, though, obviously it only has that 30-round magazine, but you can really do some work with AS Val in like solos or something like that. So it's an incredibly good gun, but it's just not as viable in like duos, trios, and quads because 30 rounds in a high fire rate, like, you're going to be running out of ammo pretty quickly. Next up here, we got the FAL. So the FAL, I would say, is probably one of these categories where you can compete with it, but it's kind of more or less off meta. The reason I'd say that is because, the shot-by-shot recoil, and also the fact that you have to basically have a trigger finger to spam it, you more or less like kind of just have to have that trigger finger, and you also just have to be able to control the recoil very, very well. And even for the best people out there on controller, it's still pretty difficult. Basically, you see some people on PC doing really well with it, but other than that, I don't really use it on controller. I was gonna say console. I don't play console, but like you just don't really see it anywhere else besides basically some top tier kind of elite PC guys that can really just spam it. Next up, we have the FARA 83. So the FARA was like basically a top tier gun. I would definitely still say though that it's really, really good. But I would say more or less, I'm going to put it into this thing, but it's definitely not a top, like the super top of the, the meta chain right now. It got bumped down a little bit because the mobility is not as good. And we also did get that update here, which kind of did change a few different things, but still pretty good out there, honestly. And next up here is going to be the FFAR-1. And let me tell you guys this right now. So this gun was really good, basically the most overpowered thing in Warzone. They kind of got nerfed a little bit, then became kind of like a mid-tier. And now, honestly, with this most recent update, I'm about to kind of put this closer towards the beginning. I should probably order these out here a little bit. I don't want to order them like too much, but I would definitely say that, the FFAR-1, I was about to say, where is that? The FFAR-1 is incredible. That sound suppressor now, you can make this a real SMG, which is kind of what people use it for. Absolutely amazing on this thing. Next up here is gonna be the FR 5.56. I'm throwing this straight up in the memes and niche. Listen, hey, this was talked about for about like a few days because of J-God. He made a video on it. People were trying to figure out what was the next best thing besides the AUG and like, the M16. We figured out that it was, decent, but it's not as good as, we thought it to be. So, hey, we're throwing that in there. It's kind of dog water. Next up is the Grau. I would definitely say that this thing is an absolute laser beam. Super, super good. It doesn't have the fastest time to kill, but because it's incredibly accurate, I'll put it up there in the meta. We're gonna have a lot of stuff probably up here in the meta category just because so many things are balanced right now. If I was to do this like a season or two ago, it'd basically probably be like M16, AUG, FFAR, you know, MAC-10, and that'd basically kind of be about it because that's like the top things people will be using. But now since everything's so evened out, you can use a lot of different guns and it's really, really nice. Now for the Groza, I would say that, I mean, I'm just gonna put here in the don't play. I mean, it was cool because, you know, the FFAR got nerfed and people were like, okay, hey, the Groza is kind of similar here, so we can use that. But it's like, well, why would you use the Groza? Like, just go use the FFAR. Like, just take a bit of an L and whatever the thing is here and just use the FFAR. And especially that sound suppressor thing now, just use the FFAR. Don't even mess with it. Like, it's really not that great. Next up, our trusty, our tried and true Kilo 141. This is going up in the meta category. Hey, listen, actually, I'm just not going to order these, but, it's going to be up here. The Kilo 141, unbelievably accurate. Super, super good, in my opinion. It doesn't have the highest, the fastest time to kill, but because it's got a solid fire rate, it's incredibly accurate. It's got, like, hardly any recoil. It's very useful in a variety of situations, and a lot of people, good and, bad players, really do like this thing. A lot more bad players tend to go for the Kilo over something like the, the AMAX here, just because of the AMAX having a little bit more recoil, even though the AMAX does hit harder. The Kilo will be, a lesser skilled player's gun of choice just because of that fact. So I definitely say the Kilo's up there. Next up here is going to be the Krigathy. aka the Krig 6. I would say this is definitely now a meta weapon. This is kind of trying to like compete with the AMAX, Kilo, the Grau. It's definitely up there now. It used to not be that great, but ever since that season 3 update and they patched and buffed some stuff, the Krig's really good. So definitely go in and use that. The M13, what I'm gonna put this in here is can compete / off meta because it doesn't have the fastest time to kill. It goes through a lot of ammo very quickly, but it's also laser beam accurate with the right setup, and I've actually had great success with it, but it's not necessarily a top tier AR. It's just really good, but I just don't know if it, belongs in the strongest / meta category. It's really solid, but I just don't quite know. So can compete. If there's like a middle category between strongest and like can compete, that's where the M13 would be, because that's where I feel like it definitely stays at, but that's just kind of my take on that one. You guys are gonna have to let me down in the comment section below what you guys think about this here so far. Next up, the M4A1. Hey, listen, we're slapping this thing right up here. This has never left the meta. Never. I mean, it may have left the meta when we had the M16 AUG and stuff, because it was like, well, why would you want to use a fully automatic AR when you could just use an AUG M16? But the M4A1 never got bad. It was always a solid weapon, and it still is. It's incredibly good. And I love it. I think it's so cool that this has stayed meta the entire time Warzone has ever been out. Now we have the Odin. I would say this goes in memes and niche. I mean, we're just gonna throw this down here. It's not really useful. I mean, it hits hard. It can be good, but I just wouldn't really use it. Now we have the Ram 7. Ram 7 is gonna go up here into the meta category. Ram is really good, honestly. It definitely is now up there as one of the top ARs to use, probably one of the top 3. Just because it's got a really solid fire rate. If you can control the recoil, it's incredibly good. And you can use it for a variety of different things. You can make it into an SMG, an AR. I mean, it could be basically whatever. It's very, very versatile, and I love that about the Ram. And also, I just like it because it's the TAR-21, basically, from Modern Warfare 2. And I'm a huge fan of the TAR-21. That's like my favorite gun of all time. Yeah, a little bit of a throwback there for those of you guys that ever played. The Scar 17, basically, we're throwing this down in memes and niche. The thing is, dog meat. Don't ever use that. The XM4, we're going to throw this up here into the meta category because this thing has a very fast time to kill, and people are starting to use it kind of like how they're using the FFAR as like an SMG, and you can even more so do that now because you just throw in that sound suppressor instead of like the agency, I believe is what this thing has, and then it becomes even more of a close quarters tank. Even though they did kind of nerf some of the Cold War gun mobility, it's still obviously really good. Now we have the Bruin. This thing used to be really solid. I'm just gonna put it in here to probably the viable category because I don't use it ever, but it's still viable. It's still like good in terms of like the power output, but just the handling. When you look at the current meta right now, we have so many better handling guns in here that are faster. It just doesn't make sense to use the Bruin. Even if you kind of stack it right, you just still are going to be very slow in comparison to a lot of these different guns here. So I just would definitely put it in the viable category, but not necessarily can compete / off meta. Next up is the Finn. I'm just putting this down here, and like, actually I'll put it down into don't play because you can still use it, but I just really wouldn't. Also the Holger is probably gonna go down here into the don't play. Don't use that thing. It's not really that good. The M60's ground loot. probably don't play. I mean, a lot of these LMGs you're kind of probably going to want to stick away from, to be honest with you. So same with like the M91, I'd never use that. The MG34, that's horrid, absolutely terrible. The PKM, I want to put this up in a viable because it has a pretty good, you know, time to kill. It's not as fast handling wise. That's why I'd say I'd only put it in viable, not can compete. But it's still actually a pretty solid LMG. The RPD, I'd say is good for ground loot, but I wouldn't say to use it on like an actual loadout. The SA-87 though, I will say this, is that this one's going to go up into probably can compete / off meta, because this is a gun that's kind of a hidden gem. Not that many people use the SA-87, and it's actually really good, myself actually included. I don't really mess with the SA-87, but it's still pretty good. Next up here, we have the Stoner 63. So we're gonna put the Stoner in viable because the Stoner is indeed viable. It's got a pretty solid time to kill. The recoil on it's a little bit interesting. It's not as mobile as I'd like it to be, whereas the SA-87 is a tad bit more mobile and is probably a little bit better, so that's why it's up there. But now we have, you know, the crossbow. I mean, listen, it don't even matter. We're throwing both those things down there in memes and niche. I mean, nobody that's good at the game is gonna be running around with those. For the EBR-14, we're just putting this in don't play. It's not good. The Kar-98, hey, listen, if there's ever been a meta gun, you know, besides the AMAX or something like that, or the M4, it's the Kar-98K. This thing is a tank. I don't really snipe that much, and you guys were getting at me for it. I'm stumbling over my words. You're getting at me for it in the comment section about like how I was like level 8 at one point. Yeah, no, this is an amazing sniper rifle. The MK2, we're putting this in like memes and niche because even if I find that in ground loot, I just basically count myself as dead. Like I almost chalk my life at that point. And basically same with the SKS. I don't think this thing is good at all. The SPR is probably can compete / off meta. It's really solid. It basically was hit scan at one point. Absolutely, it was a phenomenal gun because you could basically had no bullet travel time. It was like you're playing multiplayer. And it was kind of ridiculous, up to like 400+ meters, which was really broken. Now we have the AK-74U, and I'm gonna put this in can compete because I haven't tested this thing out since the newest patch, but I know it kind of got a bit of a nerf / a bit of a buff, and it basically became more effective at super close range. But I don't think it's as effective as it could be, to the point where it's gonna be in like, you know, the top, you know, 3 of SMGs, or maybe it could be, but I just don't really think it's going to be like, if it's the top 3, it is going to be like the number 3, you know, in my opinion. So after that, we have the AUG MW. Basically just don't play. That thing had like a really solid time to kill, to be honest. It had like a really solid damage profile, but just the way the gun handled made it not that great. And so people basically kind of disregarded how good the damage and the time to kill stats were on this thing, just because it had like terrible handling, and you just, you know, your accuracy was not going to be that great. So the build you could have for it wasn't going to be all that, you know, viable in comparison to other stuff. Now we have the Bison. I would say the Bison's viable. I don't use the Bison. I will say though, I do use the Bullfrog. The Bullfrog, definitely meta weapon. Love the Bullfrog. Probably my favorite SMG to use right now. I love the magazine capacity size. I love the recoil on it. I mean, it's fantastic. You can run it a variety of different ways. I love it. So I definitely say, you know, meta. The Fennec, I would say this is can compete / off meta. And the reason I'm saying this is because it actually has a very fast time to kill. Like, you can take people out very quickly. The downside is the reload, the handling on it, and the fact that I think it only has like a 40-round magazine, and even though it has a very fast fire rate. So you're basically when you take like one person out, you're going to be having to reload instantly. Whereas the Bullfrog, you can get like 1, 2, or 3 people out with that 55-round magazine, versus this thing blows through like 40 instantly. And then also the ISO, I would say this thing can compete, but it is off meta because it still has a really solid, you know, time to kill, but it's just not, you know, that usable in comparison to some of the other stuff out there. I think the iron sights could be a little bit better on this thing, and that'd probably make it a little bit more viable. The KSP-45, that's memes and niche. That thing is terrible. Absolutely, you know, terrible gun. The LC-10, this one's gonna go right up in here because I love the LC-10. If I find this in ground loot, if I find an LC-10 in ground loot, hey, listen, I know I'm going to have a good time in Superstore just because I love the LC-10. I think it's solid. I don't use it as much on my loadouts because I love the Bullfrog more, but I'd say, you know, Bullfrog LC-10, very good. Now we have the MAC-10. I would say that this thing is definitely still going to be up in here into the meta. This is basically probably your top 3 SMGs right now. Minus we have another one down there, a couple down there that are going to go in here. But like I said, the meta category is going to get big because of how much, you know, we have.
But the Mac 10 is fantastic. I love that thing. Just it blows through ammo a little bit too quickly, which is the downside. You almost have to reload every time you kill somebody, but it's still really, really good. I like it. The Milano, we're just putting that down in here to don't play. It's not even a meme. It's just ass. The Cold War MP5, really solid TTK. Very good. Very, very good. So I definitely put this up in here. It is basically the Modern Warfare MP5, honestly, is going to go right up in here as well. We'll just put them like side by side, but like, because they're both great. The Modern Warfare one has like less recoil, is a little bit more easy, I feel like, to control, but the Cold War MP5 has a little bit more recoil, but also hits a bit harder. So it's just kind of like a trade-off. They're both still really good though. Now for the Uzi, I would say it can compete. Like, it's not bad, but I mean, you just have to use those 32 AE rounds or whatever the magazine is, which only gives you 32 rounds in a magazine, which is not, I repeat, not very good in Warzone at all. Don't like, it's not good unless you're playing solos. So that's why I'd say it can compete, but it's not really like that great. The AUG, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'll say it's viable, because it got nerfed in the ground. That recoil on it's kind of crazy, and you can't really hit a lot of follow-up shots, so you can still use it, but it's just not going to be nearly as good as it used to be. The DMR, I'd say that can compete slashes off meta. It's still good if you can control that recoil. You can still really delete people with it, but like I said, with all these things in here that are so much better and probably even easier to use, you're going to leave it down to like a really skilled player that's going to need to use the DMR. And so there's going to be a lot more people opting to use all the rest of these weapons in here as opposed to the DMR. The M16, I'd say it's probably still a meta. It's probably the best burst rifle. I mean, we have the Carve 2, but I mean, I don't know if that's actually even in this tier maker here because of when this was made. The Carve 2 is very recent, but we have, the M16, it's still really, really good, but the bursts are a little bit more delayed. So you have to be kind of a little bit more wary of where you were at. You can't just kind of, gung-ho balls to the wallet with an M16 like you used to pre-patch. It's just not as good, but it's still really good. The Type 63, we're just putting this down here into don't play. It's not that great. The 725 is going into memes. The Gallo, that is a meta weapon, and I'd say the only thing that actually keeps it from being like probably one of the best secondaries is that stupid reload on this thing. Like, you have to jink, like you have to just hit shell. Like, you just have to slide those things in there all the time, and it's like it takes forever to reload. Very lethal, but it takes forever to reload. So it's kind of like your trade-off. Like, you take someone down, you better be finishing off your primary or, just with a throwing knife or something, because you cannot afford to spare extra shells on down players with the Gallo. That is a very big downside in my opinion. That's why I don't really use it. Also, I just kind of like having an SMG because I like my ARs with a scope on it, and I mean, you can't really use an AR inside. Next up here, we have the Howard 12. So, I mean, listen, I'll put this in here as, like, don't play because I never put it on a loadout. The Jack 12 is going to probably go and can compete / off meta because it can be very useful. Like, it's got a straight magazine reload, but you just don't really see people using it. Like, it's still good, but there's just a lot of other options for people to use. And so I just would say the Jack 12 is, like, not really as good as it could be. The model, just put in don't play. The Origin used to be dummy overpowered. Now you just don't want to use it at all. The R9, the doof, you don't really want to use that now anymore. The Street Sweeper, we'll put this up here with the Gallo because it's basic. The Street Sweeper and the Gallo are basically the same thing, except the Street Sweeper has a bigger magazine size or a shell count size, whatever you want to call it. I don't really care. But basically, I think this thing goes up to like 18 or 20, and this thing goes up to like 12. So, I mean, either way, you're either going to be reloading for a long time here, or you can be reloading for an extra long time here, just because you have more shells to put in the thing. Now the VLK Rogue, we're putting that in don't play, don't use that, dog water. The AX50, I would say, is maybe viable. It's not terrible, but it's just not really that great for a sniper rifle. The Dragunov, that is a meme. I don't know one person that willingly puts the Dragunov on their class. The HDR, I would say, can compete / off meta. No, you know what? Honestly, I would say if there's another sniper rifle people are going to use apart from the Kar 98, I would say it's probably going to be the HDR. I mean, the HDR hits very hard. Everybody's had it because they had Modern Warfare probably previously to, they had Modern Warfare with Warzone before Cold War coming out. So I would say that, the HDR is incredible. I mean, I used to love it. It was probably like, it's my highest ranked up sniper there for a while. I thought it was really solid. It still is. The M82, I'd say, I don't really know. Just don't really play it. I don't know. I just don't think it's all that great. The Pellington, I call this thing the Sellington because if I find it anywhere on the ground, I feel like I'm just gonna die. It's kind of like the Mark II carbine. I'm just basically chalking my life at that point. I would say don't play. Some people can get at me for that, but I'm never picking up a Pellington in my life. I don't trust my life to the Pellington at all. Same with the ride tech. The Tundra I know is better, so I'm going to put it as in can compete / off meta. Keep in mind, I don't use snipers all that often. I'm going off of what I see other people saying and using, and this is just kind of that. So I'll definitely put it right there. For pistols, I mean, listen, I mean, what are we going to do down here with pistols? Like, listen, like, don't play, don't use the Diamatis. All right, listen, Diamatis, dual wield Diamatis, viable. Actually, I'd say it can compete. They definitely can compete. Put them as dual wield, they can compete. They're still pretty good. The M19, listen, we're putting that as viable because I think you can dual wield those things, and the time to kill on them is really solid. The Magnums used to be really good, not as much anymore, so don't play. The Renetti, I mean, that's like okay. I mean, you can use it. I'm just gonna put it into don't play though, because I don't see anybody using it. The Snake Shot you used to be able to use. I mean, because he was dual wield and he was broke is I'll get out. The X16, we're putting that in don't play, don't use. In the melee, I mean, listen, this is a whole bunch of, you know, memes. Like, there's nothing down here that I even need to go over. I mean, listen, you could get like real strategic with it, but that's about it. Okay, so this is my full Warzone tier maker list. I'm actually pretty happy with how this came out. I would definitely say that we have a lot of balance in here so far, and keep in mind, like, this is 3 categories of fully, more or less viable weapons to use. So that's a lot of stuff. You have options to make your loadouts with. And even though, like, keep in mind, I didn't say it's viable. If you find something else in here is viable that you like, go ahead and use it. I just don't particularly use some of these things down here for good reason. There's always a glaring downside to a bunch of these guns. But yeah, I mean, this is really solid. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, you know, definitely give it a like, subscribe if you are brand new, and I'll see you guys all later. Just run out, Triple Cap, don't be Randy, and I'm out. Peace.